Aloha mai kākou, mai kalahiki a kalakau, aloha kākou. O wau Eomailani, hana wau ma ke kulanui a Hawaii ma manoa, e hā o keiki, hana wau i ka ho'oluma ana i ka olala Hawaii, ka ho'ola ana i ka olala Hawaii, ke a olala Hawaii ana kekahi. So my name is Eomailani, and I didn't say this, I am from Hawaii, and I work to normalize, revitalize, and teach the Hawaiian language through education. Mahalo.
Hola a todos, me llamo Marisol Ruiz, soy una refugiada de Chile y me considero una persona refugiada por siempre o permanentemente. Y he crecido en el área de la Bahía, específicamente San Francisco, Oakland. Y estando en el área de la Bahía, creo que está en resistencia permanente por estudios éticos, por saber la verdad, nuestra verdad. Entonces siempre estamos en la resistencia por el lenguaje y en solidaridad con otra gente y también con nuestra historia. So hi everyone, my name is Marisol Ruiz. I'm a refugee from Chile, and I consider myself a permanent refugee where we need to dismantle all borders. That's my resistance statement right there. I work at Humboldt State University, and I grew up in the Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, and I feel like growing up there is permanent resistance. Resistance was just part of the permanency of living in the Bay in terms of ethnic studies. We want true history. We want the truth. We want to abolish police from our schools, right? So all of these things, we want autonomy. We want bilingual education, multilingual education. We want to be in solidarity with different struggles and movements. That doesn't mean that there's repression and interpersonal prejudice that we have within our own communities, of course. But there's also this beauty that sometimes people dismiss, right? That's also happening underground where people are resisting together. So why resistance? Why resistance literacy? I was reading the book of Ruby Bridges that just came out, Ruby Bridges, and by Ruby Bridges, and she talks about like youth have always been in a struggle for liberation. Children have always been like she was 6 years old when she had to fight against segregation and segregated schools, and she had to take everyone screaming at her, right? Think about like what that means. So definitely it teaches understanding and bringing in resistant literacy teaches youth children that they have a voice and that things are not fair, and therefore they will need to fight to change it. It documents our, her, his, ex stories of existence and how sometimes we've had to fight for our stories to be recognized, like our counter narratives to be recognized as truth, and also fight to make sure that in this educational system where you don't have the privilege to say, I'm not going to go to school. You have to go to school. You're punished if you don't. In general, you're also punished by the system, right? They make your parents pay, or, they criminalize you and your parents if you don't go to school. So in that system that it's mandatory, people have always felt that then it should be mandatory to tell the truth and for our stories to also be told within the classroom. Literature, math, in every subject where we exist should be also told. And Eomailani, why resistance literacy?
Now, this is a topic that we had kind of come to later on outside of just the linguistics learning. I think that just to be involved in movements that are going against the status quo that are trying to normalize a different kind of language or educational experience for our children, we have to be able to be grounded in that. We have to feel comfortable with being against the normal. So in our language, the word for resistance is pretty simple. It's ku e. And the word ku means to stand, and e means in kind of a weird way, in opposition. So if you come into our communities and hear this word ku e, it's basically the way that Hawaiians feel. We're always constantly having to resist or protest against American occupation. But even in our daily kinds of life things, the way that we try and resist against English only movements, a language that is our first language, we have to really pull in and embrace our mother tongue that seems so foreign to us now through our educational systems. And even though the Hawaiian language revitalization movement has been around since the 80s, for some communities, they have just a few years in, right? Some of our more rural communities, they have maybe their first graders, second graders that have started to learn the Hawaiian language. So we can't say that our Hawaiian language is safe. We can't say that we're out of the woods, so to speak. We do take this seriously no matter what community we're in, and we constantly have to resist that pressure of English only or English is the way to success.
And so I think one of the best books in California, I'm just going to be very California centric in terms of resistance literature, is the Lemon Grove Case. And there's two books that are both bilingual, and the Zinn Project, Howard Zinn Project, the we translated, back in the days, all of Zinn's work, because we were like, this is the true history we want to teach our students in Spanish. Without separation is here, right? So here's the first case where people rose, children and parents rose up to say, like, no, segregation is not equal, and we have the right to go to a well-resourced school like everybody else. And it's a case that won, the first case that won in 1931. It didn't mean that in other parts of California, Chicanos were not segregated, because Chicanos were Mexican Americans were segregated in the state. And so another book that goes on the same lines and with the beautiful artwork of Duncan Donatiu, which I think is amazing. You can click and read his story. Separate is Never Equal is the Silvia Mendes book of how they fought in 1947 for desegregated schools in California, and how that won the Mendes versus Westminster School District. So I think these books are excellent of showing how when you see something, you can go to the courts, but it's reform, reform based in terms of like, how do we reform these policies in order for there not to be discrimination within the law? So I think that that's one way of teaching students to resist. Another book, and there's so many books about Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez that I could fill this about all side by side, we're fighting together, is side by side, lado a lado, which I think is a really good book of teaching students how, in the campo, people have had to fight in the Central Valley of California and how they won the grape. You can also talk about the grape strike. And the other thing to note here is that the Fair Education Act of California that was passed in 2016 is really important, because it is in policy telling all of us that we need to teach the true history of what happened. And the United Farm Worker Union is part of the curriculum today. So that's why I think there's been a surge of more books on Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez. And of course, they were not the only ones fighting. There's many other farm workers that are also fighting for the rights of workers within the farms and the intoxication. I also wanted to point out that the Smithsonian has an app that's called Dolores Huerta. The only issue with the app is that there's no sound. So I'm not sure if Smithsonian fixed it or not, but you can check that out. The app of Dolores Huerta is through the Smithsonian. And one of the things I like about it is it has videos that can definitely accompany you with this unit as you're teaching Dolores Huerta and you're teaching side by side. Another one is Si Se Puede, which is by by Diane Cohn, but Francisco Delgado, the illustrator, painted these beautiful pictures. This is about justice for janitors and just how, parents and kids are asking for better wages. So even if you think about Si Se Puede, the farm worker strike of having better wages within the farm worker, better labor conditions, also Si Se Puede is also about labor conditions. And as janitors, I think it's really important that kids begin to think about, why are parents fighting for better wages? What is happening, also the difference, what is happening in both of these situations as janitors and as farm workers, where they're using, being exposed to chemicals that are toxic to their health without proper defense, without proper where they could defend themselves from these chemicals that they are sniffing or even smelling, right? So we know that. And then the low wages that janitors and farm workers get to not being able to support their families, a livable wage where they can thrive as families within California. And California is one of the most expensive housing in the United States. And so here we have these wages that are not able to survive on. So I think Si Se Puede, yes, we can make a difference and we can get those wages and live thriving lives as with good wages is so important to teach kids that, sometimes we gotta just not, fight for our language and but also our existence within this capitalist system. Right. Eomailani.
So I talked a little bit about the history of this word, ku'e, and even though this comes out of order, I wanted to kind of highlight two kind of resistant movements that have been so critical for Hawaiians till exactly right now. So after the overthrow of our kingdom, we had these organizations that would go from house to house, literally gathering signatures for petitions against the overthrow of our kingdom. Yeah. And so Eomailani Campbell was one of the presidents of one of these organizations. And the importance of this document is that it was kind of suppressed. It was kind of like, oh, Hawaiians were supportive, Hawaiians wanted to be American. But if you see the number of signatures in every location from different ages, you'll see that doesn't really tell the whole story. And so when Hawaiians look at these documents that were, published in the 1800s, and we see the names of our kupuna in the lands that they were from, it's such a swell of pride, and that it encourages us to kind of keep that resistance to today. One of the ways that in our family we've shown this resistance is education, and really through sending my children to a Hawaiian immersion school. I'm not sure how it is in some of the schools in California, but for Hawaiian immersion schools, these schools aren't always resourced in ways that are tantamount to the English counterparts. And part of that is because we can't go to just mainland publishers and get curriculum that's going to resource our classrooms, right? As you saw in our other presentation, we literally have to cut and paste over books to have any kind of resources. So this kind of disparity creates a lot of problems, which is almost why the parents and families that engage their students in Hawaiian language immersion they kind of have a foundation of this resistance, is ku'e at their very core. And then I think the next slide. Some of the other mo'olelo, these are more, these definitely are mo'olelo of resistance of ku'e. So the one on the left was a story that was traditional, that is traditional, about one of our pig gods, Kamopua. And he's kind of, I guess you would call it demigod, we call it kupua, that he could shapeshift from a man into a pig, and he had these pig-like tendencies. During the time of our history when the population was going down due to different diseases that came to our shores, there was this encouragement from our chiefs to go out and make more babies, to rejuvenate the Hawaiian nation and stuff. So Kamapua'a was looked at as one of those stories that encouraged Hawaiians to really look back at our cultural pride, at our genealogies, and try and thrive within that knowledge. The mo'olelo on the right, the story on the right, the true story of Kaloi To'olau, as told by his wife, is actually also kind of related to disease and outbreak. So in Hawaii, we had these different outbreaks, but this particular one was leprosy. And it's totally timely because some of the xenophobia that goes on today about COVID-19 being a Chinese disease, or that was what our former president was promoting with kind of his racist ideologies. Leprosy in Hawaii was also looked at as a Chinese disease, and they would take people, and they didn't have the level of sophistication of testing that they do today. So even people that they just suspected had the disease, or people that maybe were rabble rousers themselves, they would send them to a very isolated island, a side of the island on Molokai. And not only that, they would put them on these shores that had these huge cliffs, but they would dump them in. They would just dump them in the ocean and then hope that they could swim to shore. So during this time, Kaloi Ko'olau is a man that refused to go to these leprosy colonies, and they instead retreated up into the mountains. And the thing that makes this a mo'olelo of resistance is because he was being sought after by the police of the time, the enforcers that were wanting to send him off to these colonies, and he refused. So he became kind of a symbol of resistance, a symbol of resisting the man, literally. And so this story continues to today as a kind of story of resistance, of holding firm to family and whatnot.
And if
go ahead.
No, if the water could talk, they would be able to tell all these other stories.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last kind of story I wanted to share was this chant that you'll have in the link as well. One of the major things that's made national and even international news is the resistance that the majority of Hawaiians have to the building of this very large telescope in one of our sacred mountains called Mauna Kea, Mauna Wakea. And so a few years ago, there was huge encampment of Hawaiians on the mountain, literally blocking the road with their bodies. One of the terrible things that you saw as a part of these resistance movements is that on one particular day, they went and they arrested our elder people that were protecting this line. And really, we found the solidarity with the Dakota Access Pipelines. They shared their stories with us of trying to save their sacred water. We shared our story with them, trying to save our sacred Mauna. So this chant is definitely a chant, even though it's a traditional chant, as a genealogy for one of our ali'i, one of our chiefs, Kauikeoli. This chant has become thrust into modern consciousness because this was a chant that was chanted at least 2 or 3 times every day on the Mauna. And what it does is it really connects our genealogies as people to our genealogies as land, so that we can't build these kinds of things in our sacred spaces because that is a desecration of our sacred spaces, of our of our gods, of our plants, which we don't see them as being separated from us. So I'll just read it because I'm not sure that you'll know how to pronounce it. I'm just a quick read. O Hanau Kamona Akea. So born is this mountain. Opua e Kamona Akea. So this is to me it's going forth. And it talks about Wakea being the man, Papavaliru Udawahine, and they get together, the man and the woman get together, and then they birth Ohoku, a female. And then, as we talked about Haloa in another one of our presentations, about how all Hawaiians are related to Haloa. Haloa was born, and then and all Hawaiians are related to Haloa. All Hawaiians are related to the mountain. So again, this is definitely a chant of resistance. And then you can go ahead and click on the video and learn for yourself.
Another book that is also so beautiful is The Spirit of Chicano Park, El Espíritu del Parque Chicano. It really talks about how the community came together in the 70s as Mexican Americans to fight for a park and a space and how they won. And that park is still in existence. Of course, there's a freeway on top of the park, which also talks about like how our, when people say, oh, Chicanos aren't racialized. So right there, you see that's the racialization because you don't take into account what people have fought for a space to be, and there's a song also of The Spirit of Chicano Park, which is by Chunky. And he talks about the ballad of the Chicano Park. So you can click on here, Rolas de Aslan, which is what California is considered Aslan. And hear the song of that. And if you ever go to Chicano Park, you can always see the beautiful murals and how people resisted in this park. The story of Emma de Nayuca is also really important because this is a story from New Mexico. She was a teacher, also fought for worker rights in the farms, but also for bilingual education and for students to know their history. So I think she's an example of what we just won in California, AB 101, which is ethnic studies for all. Now it's going to be a graduate requirement in California by 2025, a freshman class, they're gonna be the first ones to receive ethnic studies as one of and this has been a fight all the way from the Chicano movement all the way now to have not only Chicano movement, also the American Indian movement, to have these stories be told within the classroom. Black Panthers, all of that. So I think that today in California, Newsom just signed AB 101 for ethnic studies. Another story that is from Venezuela by Monica Dobert, a German, wrote this story, The Streets Are Free. It's in Spanish and English. And I really love this story. It's based on a true story of like kids not having a park. And it goes well with Chicano Park because it's like what kids did to fight to get a park. And also questioning like, okay, if the streets are free, who owns the streets and why do they own it? And why can't we go to why can't we build a park if we need a park, right? So these questions are very important for us to think about. But one of the things I love about this book is that they try many things. And in organizing, if you've ever organized, that's what you do. You try different things and things don't work until in the end, they say, well, we can do it ourselves. If they won't give us, then we take over space, public space, That's also our space because we're paying for it as taxpayers, right? We're taking our space back and we're going to build a park where kids can play safely, where cars won't run them over, right? So where's a free space that we can all play? And so that's what I love about it. It definitely goes from the organizing stages of identifying a problem, analyzing the problem, researching how to solve that problem, reflecting, constantly going together and reflecting on like, is this working? Is this now? Okay, now let's try another strategy, and bringing people in together to fight that. That is the principles of organizing. This book will teach you and kids how to organize, definitely. So I think it's a precious book that you all should have in your library. And it gives students autonomy, and we want to end with the importance of children having that autonomy, to also feel that education isn't just top down, but somewhere where we are learning together in order to solve issues of what is not okay in our problems in our community, and how we can solve them, and how we can make the space in which we're all sharing this world, which we're all sharing this space together, a better space for all of us. And also, it also teaches us to be in solidarity with each other, because okay, we have all these resources in Spanish, but our brothers and sisters in Hawaii don't. So what can we do to make that happen? What can we do to make sure that they have the resources to make that happen? And also to step aside sometimes, because there's so many of us that speak Spanish because of colonialism, that sometimes we need to step aside, to the side for others to shine and speak. That's my message. And Lali?
It's beautiful. And I think that, just not being there in California, but really seeing the context of some of the movements that are going on and the ways that authors and teachers especially are able to respond and be supportive of the students. I think it's very encouraging for me, like maybe I should be writing more, maybe I should be engaging, this kind of literature for young children that kind of encompasses more of these contemporary experiences as well. So I'm just really thankful to be able to see all of these new resources.
Oh, thank you. I think we did good. We gave them a lot of resources, teachers.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we have two, and then the last part, what did you ever put the links of the things that you wanted me to put in a hyperlink? Because we could I'm going to send this to her today. So
okay.
Done. We're done.
And then she gave you feedback. Oh, sorry, you're still recording. But she gave you feedback of like, oh, she wanted you to change something.